So this video is based on a concept that was created by two economists, one behind me, Alfred Marshall, and the next one is Lerner. And it's all to do with international trade. So the Marshall Lerner condition, and what it relates to is devaluing your currency and whether it will be successful or not. So to begin with, if we think about the diagram there, okay, let's imagine that then the UK are not happy with that exchange rate. And therefore, what they want to do is they want to devalue. So what they might do is they might supply more of their pound reserves. So this will be the Bank of England will supply more of their pound reserves to try and bring it down to a rate which suits them. So at this point, the government and the central bank, because the central bank will have done it under the agreement of the government, they decide to devalue the pound and try and keep it at that rate. And that will require constant intervention to do so. Now, the whole idea of the Marshall Lerner condition is the formula that is above me. So what we've got is the price elasticity of demand of X being exports plus the price elasticity of demand of imports, M. It has to be greater than 1 for it to be effective. So in other words, what I mean by that is it has to be the combination of both has to be price elastic. If it's not price elastic and it's deemed to be price inelastic, then a devaluation is absolutely pointless and it shouldn't be done. And the reason for that, well, first of all, let's have a look at what a devaluation will mean for imports and exports. And we can do it via the acronym above me. So we've got weak pound, imports dearer, exports cheaper. So therefore, what we're hoping is by imports being dearer, they'll be less attractive. And because they're less attractive, that UK firms will decide to buy domestically rather than buying from abroad. And exports being cheaper will be much more attractive and more attractive to foreign customers. And therefore, what the UK is hoping, if they did carry out this policy, is that they would attract new customers from abroad, and that would obviously help their net exports, and it would boost aggregate demand. And that would be the whole aim of this policy. But let's imagine that we've got a situation, and exports are cheaper. All right, so if X is deemed inelastic, and this is what we don't want, but if X is deemed inelastic, then the percentage change in quantity demanded will be less responsive than the percentage change in price, and that's the price of exports. So therefore, in this scenario, yes, volume will rise, and what I mean by volume is the units of goods which are being exported, but only slightly, because it's not that responsive. And therefore, actually, the value of exports, because of the change in price and the price being lower because of the devaluation and the exchange rate, actually that value will fall. And therefore, even though volume rises, it only increases by a little bit, but the value will fall. And we have to consider net exports in monetary terms, and therefore that wouldn't work and that wouldn't be effective. Now, if it was elastic, which we want, in this scenario, then the percentage change in quantity demand will be greater in the responsiveness than the percentage change in price. So not only will volume rise, but it'll rise at a significant rate, and therefore, because of that significant rate, the value will also rise, and that will boost the monetary inflow of that export revenue. Now, if we think about imports, and imports being dearer, and let's go for inelastic, which we don't want in this scenario. If imports are deemed inelastic, then the percentage change in quantity demanded, again, will be less responsive than the percentage change in price. So if imports become more dear, and what I mean by that is more expensive, then yes, volume will fall, which they want, but only by a little bit, because they're not that responsive, and therefore the value will rise, because what you'll find is still UK firms or UK consumers are still being forced to buy imports from abroad, but this time at a higher price. And yes, demand will fall slightly, but there'll be still a lot of demand buying these imports, and therefore the value of imports will rise, and that will not help, obviously, net exports and aggregate demand. If it's elastic, which again we want, then the quantity demanded and the responsiveness will be greater than the percentage change in price. So volume will fall, but so will the value, because what you'll find there is actually a lot of UK firms will not want to buy from abroad because it's too expensive. But because it's elastic, that suggests that they're not reliant, and they've got lots of maybe domestic alternatives that they can buy and domestic substitutes. Now, when we look at it from like a UK point of view, one of the biggest issues and the biggest worries with what a devaluation would mean is actually the UK is very, very reliant on imports. They're very, very dependent on imports. And some of the reasons is because of the deindustrialisation under Margaret Thatcher, which has continued, and we don't manufacture many goods. And because we don't manufacture many goods, we are dependent on buying them from abroad. And so even if you did devalue the currency, you'd probably find that imports are still inelastic because we still have to buy them because it doesn't have those domestic substitutes. So in terms of devaluing, you consider it to be pointless unless we've got the skill level of labour, unless we've got the investment in capital goods, unless we've got those sectors that can provide those domestic substitutes, then it's absolutely pointless. And when we're looking at exports, we can look at it from the point of view, well, what do we export? We export a lot of services. In fact, as the data shows, we are probably the most competitive in the world at financial services. And our service sector, with regards to tertiary and quaternary and so on, we're very, very competitive. And if we break down the current account and you look at trading services, we've got a surplus. But because of the specialist nature of those services, because they're so competitive anyway, and again, like I said before, the specialist nature would probably mean that even if you did reduce the price of them, they'd still be in demand. And therefore, just because you lower the price, it doesn't mean that there's going to be a massive increase in the demand for those types of services because they're being demanded already. They're our unique selling points. So therefore, will it actually make that much difference? And then when you think about, well, okay, what about other goods? What about the other goods that we could sell? Well, what goods? I mean, yes, we do sell other goods, okay? We do manufacture, but our manufacturing sector requires investment. And without that investment, a devaluation again would be pointless. And if we did invest, then you could argue, well, do we actually need to devalue? Because surely our productiveness and the increase in productive capacity should make us more competitive anyway. Now, when you're looking at the formula, which I mentioned before, in terms of your PD of X and your PD of M having to be greater than 1, you could argue, well, how do you even measure that? And that is very, very difficult. It's very, very challenging. So much so that you very rarely see it in reports. I've seen it I've read a couple from the Bank of England where they've looked at the price elasticity, but it is difficult, all right? And therefore, what you can do in an analytical argument is you can target maybe the more influential and the biggest sectors and the biggest type of goods that potentially can have a massive influence on their exports, like I've done with the financial sector.